Imagine being lifted off your feet by a man you have met only 3 times. His arms wrap around you as if you are fragile, as if this is tenderness, as if the world has decided tonight belongs to you. The threshold is decorated with greenery and white wool. Oil glistens on the doorposts, catching the torchlight like wet stone. The street behind you is still alive with singing, crude, cheerful, too loud. People clap and shout blessings as if their voices can push fate into the right shape. You are 18 now, old enough for the law to call you a woman. Old enough for Rome to pretend you are choosing this. Old enough for everyone to stop asking what you feel and start asking what you will produce. You are draped in a flame-colored veil. The flammeum turns the world into a red haze, and it turns you into something the city recognizes instantly. Bride. Your husband carries you over the threshold, an ancient superstition meant to keep you from stumbling and bringing bad luck into the house. The crowd cheers, the way crowds always cheer when they don't have to pay the price of what they celebrate. And for a few heartbeats, you believe it. You let yourself believe this is what it looks like when a life changes for the better. Then the door closes. The singing collapses into a muffled hum. The torchlight disappears. The air changes. Your husband sets you down in the atrium, and you realize something is wrong. There are too many people here. Not guests, not family, not friends lingering with wine. Strangers. They stand arranged like they were placed there on purpose. Not clustered, not chatting, positioned carefully. As if the room itself is a diagram and every body is a mark made in ink. A woman in ceremonial robes stands closest, her gaze calm and fixed, like a judge who has already read the evidence. A clerk holds a wax tablet and a stylus. A man with graying hair clutches a leather pouch the way physicians do, his expression detached, professional. And at the far end of the room, where the lamplight weakens and the shadows grow thicker, there is someone you recognize. Not from your household, from the city, from the stories. Lucius Aemilius Varro, a patron, a man whose name is spoken softly in marketplaces because loud speech attracts attention. A man who has protected half the merchants on this street from prosecutions and ruined the other half with a single complaint filed at the right time. A man who sits close enough to power that the law bends toward him without being asked. He's not smiling, he's not drunk, he's waiting. Your husband's eyes flick toward him with the reflex of someone acknowledging hierarchy. Quick, almost invisible. But you see it. Your father steps forward with a smile that is too bright, too eager, the smile of a man offering thanks to someone he cannot afford to offend. Lucius, your father says, as if their friendship is ancient. You honor us. Varro answers with a small nod that feels like permission. Your throat tightens beneath your veil, because suddenly you remember something you heard at a banquet once. A senator's wife leaning in too close while music played, the smell of wine on her breath, the look in her eyes as she whispered a warning like a curse. Be careful. There are men in this city who believe they own a bride's first night. You laughed then because you had to. Now, standing in this atrium with a clerk's wax tablet and a physician's pouch and a patron waiting as if he belongs here, you understand the warning was never a joke. And you understand something more frightening. If a first night law exists, it doesn't need to be written down. Because in Rome, the most dangerous rites are the ones enforced by fear. Before we go deeper, subscribe to Requiem of Thrones. It's the only way this channel can keep pulling buried history back into the light. Rome is a city that worships paper. Not because it loves bureaucracy for its own sake, but because paper is power that can survive death. Rome seals agreements on wax tablets the way priests seal prayers on altars. It loves witnesses. It loves signatures. It loves anything that can be produced later in a courtroom and held up like a blade. So if a formal first night law existed, an official statute granting elite men a bride's first night, we would expect to find it somewhere. A jurist would mention it, a senator would debate it, a satirist would mock it openly, by name. A legal commentary would set its boundaries. Rome wrote down what it wanted to defend, and yet when you go looking for that law, what you find is not a tablet. You find silence. Not because Rome was modest. Rome was not modest. Rome painted sex on walls and carved it into household objects and joked about it in theaters. Silence in Rome usually means something else. It means the act was too useful to challenge and too ugly to defend. It means the powerful didn't want it debated. Because debate invites limits, it means it lived where the law could plausibly deny it. Inside private households, inside patronage relationships, inside the shadow of social ruin. So the right way to investigate the first night story is not to search for a missing statute. It is to ask a darker question. What mechanisms did Rome already have that could produce the same result? Because in Rome, the difference between law and custom is often the difference between a knife on a table and a knife in your back. The first mechanism is the father, patria potestas. The father's power was not a metaphor. It was a legal reality. A father could control marriages. He could arrange them, dissolve them, disinherit. He could decide which alliances his household would make. Rome liked to tell itself that a father protected his family. That his authority was noble. But authority is only protection when it is used for the vulnerable. When it is used for the powerful, it becomes a funnel. A father could trade his daughter's future to secure his own, and call it honor, call it alliance, call it gratitude, call it necessary survival. The second mechanism is the dowry. The dowry is presented as generosity, a father providing wealth so his daughter will be respected in her new household. But in Rome, dowry is also a leash. It can be reclaimed, it can be contested, it can be delayed. It can be weaponized in disputes. Marriage becomes financial. Financial becomes leverage. And in Rome, leverage becomes permission. The third mechanism is patronage itself. Every morning in Rome, the city performs a ritual more honest than any wedding. Before sunrise, clients gather outside a wealthy man's house, men who depend on him for protection, for business, for introductions, for survival. They wait in the cold with cloaks pulled tight. They are admitted in order. They greet him. They praise him. They receive small gifts or promises of larger ones. This is called the salutatio. It is the daily proof that Rome's social order is a pyramid built on dependence. A patron can save you from a lawsuit. A patron can create one. A patron can make your contracts flourish. A patron can starve them. A patron can whisper a name into a magistrate's ear and change the outcome of a trial before it begins. So when a patron wants something from your family, something you cannot afford to deny, you do not need a written law. The law is already standing in your atrium, wearing a toga and smiling politely. The fourth mechanism is shame. Rome was obsessed with reputation. A family could survive losses. It could survive illness. It could survive even political setbacks. But scandal was a slow poison that could destroy everything without a sword being drawn. If a patron wanted access to a bride, he didn't have to announce it. He could hint, he could imply, he could create a situation where refusal would look like insult, and insult would become accusation, and accusation would become ruin. Because in Rome, the most effective coercion is the coercion that forces the victim to participate in their own silence. Now look back at the atrium, Varro waiting in your husband's house like he belongs there. Your father's smile stretched too tight, your husband's jaw clenched, eyes careful, and understand the true horror of the first night story. Even if it was never law, it could still be real. Because Rome built a system where a powerful man could take a bride's first night the way he could take a contract, a favor, a vote. Not with violence in the street, with dependence, with invisible consequences. Varro steps forward. He doesn't touch you, not in front of witnesses. Power prefers elegance because elegance is easier to deny. He stops 2 steps away and lifts a hand, not as a greeting to you, but as a signal to the room. The clerk lowers his eyes to the wax tablet, waiting. The woman in ceremonial robes, your pronuba, holds her posture as if she is part of the structure of the house. Varro speaks to your husband first, because that is the logic of Rome. Marcus, he says, using your husband's name like a mark. A fine match. Your husband nods quickly. Your father has served me well, Varro continues, turning his gaze to your father. I've protected his business, guided his disputes, smoothed the path. He smiles, and I do not forget loyalty. Your father's smile tightens. Gratitude, yes, but also fear. You can see it at the edges of his eyes, the way his face has learned to hold 2 emotions at once. Varro's gaze finally touches you. It isn't lust you see there. It's entitlement. A calm certainty that the world will arrange itself around his desire because the world has always arranged itself around him. He speaks softly, like he is explaining a tradition everyone should already understand. The old stories, he says, are misunderstood. No one laughs. No one moves. He turns slightly toward the clerk. Record, he says. Your stomach drops. Record what? This is the moment when rumor becomes procedure. Not because a law is being quoted, because a man with enough power can turn his preference into a ritual. The pronuba steps forward, voice measured and formal. The rites must be completed, she says, as if she is reciting an ancient script that absolves everyone of personal responsibility. Your husband's hands flex once at his sides. He looks like a man swallowing something bitter. Your father cannot meet your eyes, and you understand, fully, brutally, that the first night was never a right granted by the state. It was a right granted by fear. What happens next does not need to be described in graphic detail to be horrifying. The horror is not in the physical specifics. The horror is in the social machinery. In the way adults in this room behave as if your body is not your private self, but a resource to be negotiated. In the way your father stands there and lets it happen because he sees the cliff edge of ruin behind Varro's polite words. In the way your husband is trapped too, because refusing a patron is not bravery in Rome. It is self-destruction. The pronuba guides you with calm efficiency, not as a guardian of intimacy, but as a supervisor of order. Lamps burn steadily, so darkness cannot hide anything that later might be disputed. The clerk's stylus scratches into wax. The physician's pouch rests nearby, not as care, but as confirmation. You are not a person being cherished. You are a transfer being finalized. And if you protest, if you resist, if you beg, your words will be treated like noise. Because the only language that matters in this room is the language of authority. This is how first night becomes real in a civilization that can pretend it doesn't exist. No official statute, only a patron's expectation wrapped in ceremony. Only a family's dependence disguised as gratitude. Only a city's silence ensuring no one ever says the quiet part out loud. Later, Rome's poets will sing about love. They will write about weddings as if they were celebrations of mutual joy. The state will display statues of goddesses smiling gently. Fertility as blessing, marriage as order. But in elite households, there was another truth. Marriage was not only a union, it was a battlefield where power negotiated bloodlines. And when bloodlines are at stake, morality becomes flexible. Now comes the part Rome understood better than anyone else. If you can control legitimacy, you can control inheritance. If you can control inheritance, you can control families. If you can control families, you can control the future. This is why the first night rumor clings to Rome like smoke. because the empire was obsessed with certainty. A bride's first night mattered symbolically, not because of romance, but because it marked the beginning of the line. The first night was the moment the city imagined as the sealing of a contract, and any powerful man who could insert himself into that moment through coercion, patronage, or social force was not just taking pleasure, he was taking control. He was declaring dominance over another man's household. He was reminding everyone in the room that their lives were held together by his favor. In that sense, the first night is not merely personal. It is political theater. It is humiliation ritual. It is hierarchy made visible. Rome loved visible hierarchy. It built architecture around it. Processions, titles, seating arrangements at banquets, the order of clients entering a patron's house. Everything in Rome was designed to remind you where you stood. And nothing reminds a family where it stands like watching its bride become the price of protection. That's the set piece Rome never carved into stone, because stone is permanent, and permanence invites judgment. Better to let it live in private rooms, in whispered obligations, in acts everyone sees but no one names. When dawn comes, the house changes its face. The lamps burn low. The air smells of oil and stale wine. The witnesses are dismissed. The clerk stores his wax tablets the way you store evidence. Varro leaves calmly, as if he attended a ceremony and fulfilled a rite that was never written down, but never questioned. Your father looks relieved, the way men look relieved after paying a debt with something that doesn't belong to them. Your husband looks hollow. He avoids your eyes, not because he is innocent, but because meeting your gaze would force him to admit what he allowed. And you, whatever you feel inside, learn what every Roman woman trapped in a powerful system learns sooner or later. Your feelings do not change the record. The record is what matters. Now, briefly, we need to talk about the rites Rome hid behind, because this is where the first night myth and the wedding night procedures sometimes blur together. In some households, tradition created supervision. An older matron, a pronuba, witnesses, sometimes a physician to confirm the completion of the marriage in the language Rome trusted. There were fertility symbols and old gods and rituals later generations tried to erase, not because Rome was prudish, but because even Rome had limits on what it liked to say plainly. That material matters here for one reason, not because it proves a universal first night law, but because it reveals the mentality. A civilization that turns intimacy into documentation is a civilization that will always tempt powerful men to intervene. If your body is already treated like evidence, it becomes easier for a patron to treat it like currency. If your marriage is framed as a contract, it becomes easier for a patron to claim a signature. If your family is dependent, it becomes easier to make the demand sound like tradition. This is how the forbidden rumor survives. It isn't a single written law. It's a convergence, a legal culture obsessed with certainty, a social system built on dependence, a hierarchy that rewards entitlement, and a silence that punishes anyone who speaks. Now we reach the layer that explains why later centuries were so eager to treat this as myth. Because admitting it would change the story of Rome. Rome is celebrated as the foundation of law, as order, as civilization. But what if the law was also a theater used to disguise exploitation? What if order was maintained by turning private lives into public currency? What if civilization was built not only with aqueducts and roads, but with the systematic training of people, especially women, to accept that their bodies were not theirs? That is not a comfortable foundation myth. So later generations cleaned it. When Christianity rose and Rome's self-image shifted, older rites became embarrassing. Symbols were smashed or buried. Texts disappeared. Vocabulary changed. Public memory was edited. This erasure was not only religious, it was political. A new civilization doesn't like to admit what it inherited. it prefers to claim purity. And so the first night law was left in the fog, half remembered, half denied, easy to mock as barbaric fantasy, easy to dismiss as propaganda. But dismissing it entirely misses the point. Because the most frightening thing about the first night story is not whether a statute existed. The most frightening thing is that Rome had everything it needed to make it happen without one. It had fathers with legal authority over daughters. It had dowries that turned marriages into negotiations. It had patrons who functioned like private governments. It had courts that could be weaponized. It had reputations that could be destroyed with whispers. It had enslaved bodies used openly, making exploitation feel normal. And it had a culture of silence so strong that the victims' voices rarely survived. That is what the first night story is really pointing at. Not a law carved into stone, a reality carved into social structure, a system where a powerful man didn't need permission to take. He only needed the world arranged so that saying no was too expensive. So when someone asks, did Rome have a first night law? The honest answer is darker than either yes or no. Rome had something worse. It had a civilization where the powerful could behave as if they had that right, and everyone else had to pretend it wasn't happening. History remembers Rome for engineering, conquest, order. It forgets the quiet rooms where order was maintained through humiliation. It forgets the women told to endure for the sake of family survival. It forgets the fathers who smiled while sacrificing what wasn't theirs. It forgets the husbands who swallowed shame because challenging a patron meant ruin. It forgets the patrons themselves, men who turned dependency into entitlement and called it tradition. But forgetting doesn't erase reality. It only makes it easier to repeat it under new names. Now you know what the first night myth is really about. Not a medieval fantasy. Not a single missing law. A system, a machine. A world where power moved through families the way blood moves through veins, and where the most intimate threshold of a woman's life could become payment for a man's protection. And that is the kind of history Rome preferred to keep unwritten, because unwritten crimes are easier to deny.